Great. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Emily Voss, and on behalf of the Center for Civic Education, I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's session and our 60-minute civics series. So today's focus will be from Montesquieu to Madison, the dilemmas of republics large and small. Our 60-minute civics programs are designed to bring teachers, scholars, and civic educators together to explore big questions in government and history, with a focus on how they connect to the classroom. And tonight's discussion will be a perfect example. So tonight we'll be exploring how Enlightenment thinkers, especially Montesquieu and the framers of the Constitution, wrestled with the challenges of scale, liberty, and stability in Republican government. This conversation will directly connect to We the People Units 1 and 2, and it can definitely help shed light on today's tensions between national unity and local autonomy in our large, diverse modern democracy. So, let me start by introducing our speakers for today. Dr. Lester Brooks is Professor Emeritus at Anne Arundel Community College. Dr. Brooks earned his BA from Indiana University, his MA from Howard University, and his PhD from the University of Michigan. His teaching and scholarship span the history of the United States, and he brings a wealth of expertise in constitutional development and civic thought. And joining him later will be Ben Fabian. Ben is a social studies teacher at Douglas S. Freeman High School in Henrico, Virginia, where he teaches advanced placement government and U.S. history. A very experienced educator and coach of We the People, Ben has guided students to success at both the state and national levels. He's passionate about civic education and helping students make connections between constitutional principles and contemporary issues. So we are honored to have both of them with us tonight. Dr. Brooks will begin with a presentation and then we'll open the floor for your questions. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go, and we will certainly leave time for that. And then we'll hear from Ben about how you can translate some of these, big ideas to the classroom. So certainly look forward to engaging with you as much as possible. But without further ado, let me hand things over to Dr. Lester Brooks. Thanks, Lester.
Thank you, Emily. Uh, Let me just jump into this and hope everyone can see this. I just want to zero in on this one aspect here from Montesquieu, as the title talks about. And this is taken from historian Gordon Wood, The Creation of the American Republic. Americans were well aware of the prevailing maxim made famous by Montesquieu that only a small, homogeneous society whose interests were essentially similar could properly sustain a Republican government. So, with that in mind, I want to bring us forward uh, and talk a little bit about what was shaping the formation of government. Because what's astounding here, that the founding fathers had the opportunity to form a government. And so they did a lot of studying. They read English history. They read history of Rome and Greece and other histories. So ideas of government were rattling around. John Adams, Jefferson, and others, they were thinking about these issues, the idea of government. In fact, John Adams made this statement. He said, the real revolution took place in the minds of the American people.
Mhm.
And that really struck me as very important. There was this evolution going on in the minds of the American people as they began to think about government. And I want to mention this. One of the groups that the founding fathers were reading were the Whigs. And as I said, they had read English history. They understood the competition that was going on with the king that had been several kings had protests had been and people had protested against them. But the Whigs, I always remind my students about the Whigs. Two of them were John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon, who wrote Cato's letters in 1720. And here, what they said, let me make sure I can see all of this. is that the greatest danger to the liberty and thus the equality of the people came from their leaders. The people must constantly be wary of men coming to power, being corrupted by it, and stealthily usurping power and liberty from the people. Every man should possess the right of resistance. Without this right, man could not defend his liberty. So, this whole idea of power, and we're going to come back to this again and again. This where should power lodge? There was a fear of power. Does the monarchy have too much power? Do the people have too much power? Licentiousness, too much democracy? What type of government should be instituted? And so, again, these thoughts were being generated. And if we look at, let's see, the Declaration of Independence, and it's not just Jefferson. Others, as I said, were thinking about the same thing. John Adams, all of you know, wrote about types of government. He talked about the mixed government, that there should be a balance, monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. So he had and calling it this balance type of government. But here in the second paragraph of the Declaration, Jefferson talks about ideas of government. And certainly this is very famous to all of us, but this idea that people have God given rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But in order to better protect those God given rights, they formed government because as a collective, people's rights are better protected than if they did it by themselves. So, here again, this idea of what type of government, where should power lodge? And as I said, we see it right there in the Declaration of Independence, and others were thinking about the same thing. Well, with this Declaration of Independence, as you know, 1776, there has to be a government. And there was a big fight, as you well know, that they needed to declare independence in order to get foreign countries to support their independence movement. But not everybody was on board. So there's a whole argument there about whether they should declare independence, when they should declare independence. But in June of 1776, they do form two committees. One came up with the Declaration of Independence as drafted by Thomas Jefferson with the help of the other members of the committee. But there was a second committee that was established, and that committee was responsible for coming up with a government. And even though there were about a dozen members on that committee, the one person that really is a key member and drafted the government was John Dickinson. And John Dickinson had already established himself with a colonial wide reputation with his letters from a Pennsylvania farmer. And so he had been urging individuals to protest, but not to declare independence. And he was extremely famous for a while, but because he didn't sign the Declaration of Independence, that sort of hurt him, even though later he does join a militia unit. But he's the drafter of the Articles of Confederation. And I want to just look at the first couple here. I don't have all of the articles here, there are about 13 of them. The style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America. So there we get the name. But it's that second bullet here. Each state remains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States and Congress assembled. That is the key issue right there. They had just finished the colonists had just finished fighting Great Britain, a strong central government. So that issue of where should power lodge? Should it be with the states or with a central government? And here it's presented here. And the response was, as this bullet says, is that the lion's share of power would be lodged with the states rather than a central government. So they deliberately created a central government that would be weak. and specifically, it couldn't tax. Again, they had just finished fighting a strong central government. The last thing they wanted to do is recreate another one. And so, if we look at that third bullet, basically a firm league of friendship, the states were saying, leave us alone, don't bother us unless there's a crisis, unless there's an emergency. The articles goes into effect in 1781. Even though they had it drafted by 1777, it took several years because of some other issues, particularly land claims, that delayed the adoption of this first Constitution of the United States. So it goes into effect in 1781, and throughout the 1780s, problems arose. And I want to use James Madison because one of the key individuals in this entire period, as you well know, is James Madison. And to understand this whole constitutional early republic period, to me, he's one of the key individuals that you have to understand, James Madison. In 1787, he drafts The Vices of the Political System of the United States. So throughout the 1780s, he's watching what's occurring and he's seeing what the states are doing. Now, as we saw before, many people believe that the states were the ideal type of government. It was small, homogeneous. But here's what he found. He found the failure, a number of problems with this first constitution. Number one here, failure of the states to comply with the constitutional requisitions. One of the things that, again, deliberately creating the central government weak, they maintained this requisition system that was used during the war years. Congress could send out a requisition to a state. The problem was Congress didn't have any power to enforce that requisition. So, for example, during the war, if Congress sent out a requisition to North Carolina, let's say, and said, we need 1,000 boots for the soldiers, if North Carolina didn't submit 1,000 pairs of boots, Congress had no way of enforcing that requisition. They couldn't tell North Carolina, you deliver those boots at the end of the month or else. There was no power behind that. And so here in the Confederation Congress, now remember, with this, under the Articles of Confederation, you have a unicameral legislature that is the government. There's no executive branch, there's no judicial branch. There's this one House legislative body that is issuing these requisitions, and states were still ignoring the requisitions. Two, encroachments by the states on the federal authority. As I said before, Congress couldn't levy taxes. As you know, that was one of the big issues that they complained against Great Britain. And certainly they tried to establish an import tax, but several states wouldn't agree to that. And again, let me give you an example. New York was obtaining import taxes from Connecticut and New Jersey. So they did not want to relinquish that power of import taxes from these other states because they had better harbors. And so again, encroaching states on federal authority. There were violations, said Madison, of the law of nations and of treaties. Here is the Confederation Congress could negotiate a treaty with a foreign country, yet an individual state could ignore the stipulations of that treaty, as some states were doing. One of the stipulations in the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War was that British creditors wanted to be repaid. Many Americans were in debt to British creditors. But what some states were doing is they were making it more difficult for those British creditors to get their money. So again, violating these treaties. And so here's continued list of some of the other things that Madison saw. And I don't want to say that Madison was the only one that was seeing these issues. Others were also seeing issues under the Articles of Confederation. Some began to realize that under the Articles, Congress was broke. They literally were running out of money. And so something needed to be done. What needed to be done was to reform the Articles of Confederation. So, as many of you know, the Annapolis Convention was called for 1786 that would reform, but not enough delegates showed up in Annapolis. And so there was a decision to call for another convention in Philadelphia in 1787, which would begin in May. But many of you are familiar with Shays' Rebellion that occurred during the winter of 1786 and 1787 that influenced some of the delegates that would attend that Philadelphia convention. And Shays' Rebellion, led by Daniel, well, one of the leaders was Daniel Shays. There were others in Western Massachusetts. That's where this rebellion took place. Farmers in Western Massachusetts were overburdened with debts and taxes. They had appealed to the state of Massachusetts for relief. That wasn't coming because one of the huge problems in the 1780s was currency. Should paper money be printed? And Madison had talked about that as well as others. Certainly, debtors wanted paper money printed because it's easy to get a hold of it. Creditors did not want it because of inflation. So here, the farmers in Western Massachusetts rebelled because they were overburdened with debts and taxes. Look at the responses here to Shays' Rebellion. This is George Washington's response. We have probably had too good an opinion of human nature in forming our Confederation. Experience has taught us that men will not adopt and carry into execution measures the best calculated for their own good without the intervention of a coercive power. I do not conceive we can exist long as a nation without having lodged somewhere a power which will pervade the whole union. So again, Washington is suggesting that a new government needed, the government needed to be stronger to put down rebellions such as Shays' Rebellion. But not everybody agreed. Certainly, we have a different view from Thomas Jefferson on Shays' Rebellion. The spirit of resistance to government is so valuable on certain occasions that I wish it to be always kept alive. It would often be exercised when wrong, but better so than not to be exercised at all. I like a little rebellion now and then. So, for the most part, many people saw the Shays' Rebellion and the need to strengthen the government. But strengthen it in what way? So we get to the Philadelphia Convention, and once we get to the Philadelphia Convention, as you well know, there is the separation of powers. They establish an executive branch, a legislative branch, a judicial branch. They establish a bicameral legislature. They establish checks and balances because going back to what the Whigs say, you have to be careful of power. And this whole idea of states, strong states or weak central government, that still is going to play into the Philadelphia Convention. And I sort of skipping through here because we have so much. Once the Constitution was drafted, and they finished drafting it in September of 1787, it was now sent to the states for ratification. And two groups formed: the Federalists who wanted to adopt the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists who opposed adopting the Constitution. But this James Winthrop takes us back to what Montesquieu was saying about the idea of of a republic being in a small area. Here's what Winthrop says: the idea of an uncompounded republic, on an average 1,000 miles in length and 800 in breadth, and containing 6 millions of white inhabitants, all reduced to the same standard of morals, of habits, and of laws, is in itself an absurdity and contrary to the whole experience of mankind. And this sort of captures one of the arguments of the Anti-Federalists, that if you're going to have a government, a Republican form of government, it has to be in a small area, and the perfect size was the states. Because other arguments that the Anti-Federalists made, for example, they said that in a small area, there would be fair representation. Uh, uh, so said the Federalists. The Anti-Federalists said that representation would not be fair. How can you get fair representation if you have a large republic? Whereas in the state, you can have fair representation because the representatives would feel the people, they would think like the people, they would understand the people. So that's what the Anti-Federalists were saying. They were saying that the center of government would be close to them. The Anti-Federalists believe that certainly people, it wouldn't just be the aristocrats, that the cost of representative wouldn't preclude those on the lower end from being representatives. So this was part of the Anti-Federalist argument. Certainly not all, but within what we're talking about, a large or small republic, certainly the Anti-Federalists were in favor of small republics would be the best. However, let's take a look at James Madison's views here, because he had a different way of looking. And first of all, if we look at Madison's Federalist Number 39, as you well know, in that ratification process, Madison was approached by Alexander Hamilton to write a number of essays to convince people to support the adoption of the Constitution. And Hamilton approached Madison and he approached John Jay. And John Jay wrote about 5 of them before he became ill and had to drop out. And so most of the 80, what was this, 5 or 6 Federalist papers were written by Hamilton and Madison. And Federalist Number 39, this is Madison's definition of a republic. He says, we may define a republic to be, or at least may bestow that name on, a government which derives all its powers directly or indirectly from the great body of the people and is administered by persons holding their offices during pleasure for a limited period or during good behavior. It is essential to such a government that it be derived from the great body of the society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. Otherwise, a handful of tyrannical nobles exercising their oppressions might aspire to the rank of republicans and claim for their government the honorable title of republic. So there, Madison explains what he meant by republic. And he's saying that what was done at Philadelphia, the government that was established at Philadelphia, was a Republican form of government. And furthermore, in one of the most famous, if not the most famous of the Federalist Papers, famous number 10, there are a couple things I want to mention here before we come back to that size of the republic. And that is what Madison says: all governments are troubled. All government, whether it's a Republican or any other kind of government, they all are troubled by factions. And he says, by a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. So your factions seem to be these groups that were out for themselves, that were not out for the general whole. But this is where Madison and Montesquieu have a difference because Madison says you don't have to have a republic in a small area. It doesn't have to be just at the state level. What Madison suggests in Federalist number 10 is extend the sphere, he says, and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests. You make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens. So, to some extent, what he's saying is that uh, contrary to what the anti-federalists were saying, if you extend this, you will create more factions. But what do those factions do? They cancel each other out. So in this large republic, what people were going to have to do in these factions, they're going to have to negotiate, they're going to have to debate, and they're going to have to compromise. That was his argument about this. Whereas and the Anti-Federalists were saying, wait a minute, you can't have this one set of laws for everybody. The people of Georgia and the people of Connecticut, they're not the same. They're different people. They have different mores, different morals, different views. You won't have representation for individuals like that. And Madison says it will work because now when you extend the sphere, all those factions can't cause too much trouble because they will cancel each other out. That's what Madison is arguing in Federalist number 10. Uh, so that's part of that debate that he is sort of saying to those who argue it can only be in a small area. No, it can exist. The Philadelphia Convention has established an extensive republic, and it will work because the factions will cancel each other out. So that was James Madison. But then I also want to mention this. This is from Federalist number 51. Okay? In order to lay a due foundation for that separate and well, actually, let's skip to the second paragraph is where I really want to get. But the great security against the gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. And so that's what's going to happen in this extensive republic, that if the different branches have that ambition, they will be able to cancel each other out. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflection on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But he does say, yes, the people are in charge. But in that last sentence, he says, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions. So and so here, what Madison is suggesting, an extensive republic will work. Well, it's one thing to put this on paper. It's another to put it in an operating manner. And so when you look at testing this new government that was established, this new extensive republic, there are going to be tests. For example, George Washington is going to have to establish some sort of models for later presidents, two-term presidency. Just the idea of a cabinet, what to do with a cabinet, and he's going to form it into an advisory group. Alexander Hamilton, to me, the other crucial individual to understanding this period and putting the government into operation, establishing a financial structure with an extended an extended debt, excise taxes, and Bank of the United States. So all of this is going to test this new republic. How is this extensive republic going to work? And in the 1790s, we do see it working. Now, as far as those factions, they're going to have to wrestle with the factions too. That's going to be another test of this republic, because we begin to see what some historians call the first party system. And so we get those who supported Jefferson and Madison calling themselves the Republicans. We get those supporting Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, the Federalists. Now, certainly it's more complex than that, but we do see these first two political parties, the Federalist Party and the Republican Party, coming into being in the 1790s. And so here we will see these factions and how are they supposed to operate. They're supposed to debate and compromise. And as you know, that doesn't always happen. We also, the test of do we have the separation of powers and are they individually strong enough to counter the others? John Marshall is going to help that when he becomes Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and makes the judicial branch of government a strong branch that can stand up to the executive branch and the legislative branch. We're going to also have the fight. If we go back to the Articles of Confederation, where it talked about the states, it created that issue of states versus central government, who should have the lion's share of power. And this issue still exists with us today. And throughout American history, it has existed. For example, 1815, there was what was called the Hartford Convention. New Englanders were upset with the War of 1812 because it was disrupting their shipping and commerce. So there was some talk about separating from the Union. A little bit later, 1830s, we get South Carolina angry at a high tariff. And so there was that question, should South Carolina secede from the Union behind John C. Calhoun and his nullification and secession theories, the compact theory? And certainly Andrew Jackson didn't particularly care for that. Later, we have the Civil War, again, testing that issue of the states and the central government. Again, that power control over certain issues. And within the Civil War, we have Lincoln and his issue of civil liberties and questioning does the central government have too much power and is it violating people's rights and liberties? Another test would be minority rights. 1840s, we get the Seneca Falls Convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and upstate New York. Uh, Interestingly enough, using the Declaration of Independence and rewording it to call for women's rights. The Equal Rights Amendment coming up to the 1920s that was introduced to Congress in the 1920s. And so that's another issue that an extended republic has had to wrestle with. The issue of blacks and the issue of slavery and the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, uh, also, again, reflect that test that an extensive republic has had to wrestle with, as well as several others. And I should stop now so that we can discuss some questions and maybe explore some of these issues a little bit further. I do want to mention, though, I do want to put that up just for individuals who are interested in some of these issues. James Madison, The Creation of the American Republic, a short little book about 180 pages, really captures James Madison, what you need about James Madison. Um, and some of the others, I think to me, one of the best on this whole period is number three, The Radicalism of the American Revolution. I'm a big Gordon Wood fan, so anything he writes, I enjoy. But then there are some others that are pretty good that you might want to consult. Emily, I guess let me
Yeah.
stop here.
Well, thanks.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brooks. Okay, so I've encouraged folks to add questions to the chat there, but I'm just going to kick one off to start. So, of the proposals that Madison put forward, there was factions, checks and balances, extending the sphere. Which of those do you think remains the most relevant today in the maintenance of a large republic?
Uh, to me, it's that idea that compromise, the art of American politics is compromise. And that's, to me, you have to have that. What else can you do?
Right.
Let me see if I can get up here. Uh-oh.
You should just be able, if you're trying to stop the screen share, you should just be able to click.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so yeah, to me, the art of American politics, because you're not going to get everything that you want. So there has to be the con. Now we've had periods of stalemate, and we're going to always have that.
Mhm.
But there has to be sooner or later an understanding. Uh,
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and another question from the audience here. So, how do modern elections in America differ from those envisioned by the framers of the Constitution?
how to modern elections?
Hmm?
Uh, that's hard to answer because when we have this technology, I don't think they saw that. Plus, remember, they were live voice elections, at least at the local level, where you went and you had maybe a treat from one candidate or the other candidate, and whoever had the best treats got your vote. So it's a lot. And then you went and announced, so everyone standing around is going to hear who you're voting for. Now, it's so complicated because we have technology. Um, but still, elections are crucial. They're fundamental. It's just how do you keep them fair? And I think going into the future, that's going to be a huge problem with AI and the technology that we have. How do, because we've always had violations, money slipping under the table, dirty tricks, as you know, that have been played, all the dirty tricks when you read about the politicians and the dirty tricks played at election time, it's absolutely astounding what they can come up with. So, and that's not going away. That's always been, and it's going to continue to exist in the future. But now people have technology to help them.
So there's another comment in the chat, and I'm trying to figure out how to form it in the terms of a question. So the gist of it is Madison envisions this large republic with lots and lots of small factions. And that is the kind of situation that you might see in multi-party parliamentary systems. But that isn't how things developed in the United States. We ended up with two parties very firmly entrenched. And so even if we do have, factions within those parties, it doesn't necessarily seem like the factions are counteracting each other in the same way that Madison thought that they would. Um, so I guess I would just be curious to your thoughts as to, why did it work so differently here compared to how it transpired elsewhere in parliamentary systems?
I think that in breaking away from Britain and establishing a republic here, I think the history changed everything. So you do have that separate legislative, executive, and judicial, trying to stay away from any monarchical or aristocratic type of society. And so I think when we look at the politics here and the factions, as you say, all the parties have sub factions in them. So we can talk about conservative Republicans, moderate Republicans, liberal Republicans. We can talk about conservative Democrats, moderate Democrats, liberal Democrats. The party, the ideology of the parties has changed over time. The Democrats of the 1860s uh, are different from the Democratic Party today, and so the flow. But I think that's due to a democratic republic, and I think because of a democratic republic, we've allowed the ideology, the shifts in ideology, and the shifts within parties that not everyone is going to be in agreement, even within one faction. So it's interesting. I'm certain Madison would be able to understand it because I think one thing people don't understand, sometimes they say that Madison flip-flopped in the 1790s because all of a sudden he was arguing for a strong state government. And to me, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think Madison was one of those individuals who was trying to establish an ideal government. What was the best ideal government? In the 1780s, what was needed was a strong central government. But in the 1790s, you realized you can't have too strong of a central government because then it would overpower the state. So now he had to shore up the state. So I think it was just his sort of understanding of what needs to be done to establish a true ideal republic. But yeah, I think all of them would be blown away nowadays because they didn't see so many things coming. But to me, I think the most important part, well, one of the most important parts of the Constitution is the first sentence. And I tell my students, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, I think they got it exactly right. That they understood things are going to change, but we have to continue to try and improve this system.
Mhm.
And sometimes we go forward, and sometimes we take a few steps back. Uh, but the idea is to make a more perfect union.
Well, I don't think you could have said it any better. Okay, there are some other questions, but I do want to make sure that we give some floor time to Ben Fabian, who is going to help us think through some, more specific classroom application of some of these major issues that the framers were wrestling with and how we can kind of help the students grapple with those as well. So we will come back for more questions, I promise. But first, Ben Fabian.
Hey everybody. Um, so I just want to kind of drop in here, and I want to quickly, very quickly, kind of talk a little bit about how this looks in a classroom, and especially this year. This is pretty relevant if you teach We the People, which I do. Um, because this really gets at the one of the Unit 1 questions. It almost asks exactly this, which is super fun. One of the things that I like doing is, and I love the fact that one of the things that we see in American history, time after time after time, is that everything old is new again. You just have to wait long enough. And you will see these same debates come up again and again and again. And one of the things that I like to do is have my students read a little bit of Montesquieu during our study of Unit 1. So I have some excerpts. I don't make them read the entirety of the Spirit of the Laws. I'm not that kind of a torture expert. Um, so but I do specifically engage them on this question, where Montesquieu talks specifically about the need for republics to be small. And this is something that comes up a lot during the Federalist, anti-Federalist debates. This is a really big deal. And one of the things that I tell them is that if you look at who are the political philosophers that get quoted the most by the founding fathers, the number one by far is Locke. But number two, and it's actually not too far behind, is Montesquieu. And this is one of the things that the anti-federalists throw at them, throw at the Federalists quite a bit. You guys clearly haven't been reading your Montesquieu. This goes. They come at this a lot, and so I just want to take a minute and I want to read a particular piece out of one of the anti-federalists, probably the most famous of the anti-federalists, and that is Brutus, who might have been Robert Yates, might have been Philip Melanchthon Smith. We're not really sure who. I think historians used to think it was Smith, and now they're pretty sure it's Yates, but we'll see. We'll probably never know. But this particular line or this particular paragraph out of it, if you'll forgive me, in a republic, the manners, sentiments, and interests of the people should be similar. If this be not the case, there will be a constant clashing of opinions, and the representatives of one part will be continually striving against those of the other. This will retard, and I always tell them, like, you have to forgive them for not using proper language here, but the operations of government and prevent such conclusions as will promote the public good. If we apply this remark to the condition of the United States, we shall be convinced that it forbids that we should be one government. The United States includes a variety of climates. The production of the different parts of the Union are very variant, and their interests of consequence diverse. Their manners and habits differ as much as their climates and productions, and their sentiments are by no means coincident. The laws and customs of the several states are, in many respects, very diverse, and in some opposite. Each would be in favor of its own interests and customs, and of consequence, a legislature, formed of representatives from the respective parts, would not only be too numerous to act with any care or decision, but would be composed of such heterogeneous and discordant principles as would constantly be contending with each other. And 2 years ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia gave me a really great way to discuss this, because one of the things that I love to do during the Federalist anti-Federalist debates is I talk about Brutus here, and I bring up this argument. Here it is, and he's getting this from Montesquieu, who I've had you read, and he's saying it can't work, guys. The union's too big. There's too many differences. There's too many things that will tear us apart. And Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 9, I think, has the funnier response to this. And I always teach my students that the best way to understand Federalist 9 and 10 is that they're kind of a direct response to Brutus. They are responding to Brutus's Montesquieu argument there. And Alexander Hamilton has a sort of cheeky response where he says, that's cool, Brutus. So by that argument, isn't the state of New York too big? If we're supposed to just have city states, how are you feeling about the state of New York? I don't know if you've looked at a map lately, but it's kind of large. It's kind of big there. But it's Madison that really has the argument that I think we're pretty much all familiar with, the extend the sphere argument, that in a large republic we're going to have these discordant voices, but that's okay because they're gonna sort of cancel each other out. And I love it when the news gives me opportunities to show that, again, everything old is new again. And I like what Paige put in the chat. History is in present tense, right? I think William Faulkner said something similar, right? The past isn't even really past. But Marjorie Taylor Greene tweets out in 2023, we need a national divorce. We need a national divorce. We can't get along. It can't work, right? This is her thing, and specifically, I'll read her tweet for you really quickly, and give me 1 second because I want to get them both up here. Where is it? Just this once. We'll do that. Okay. And now let me get back here. Okay. So the first thing that she says is we need a national divorce. We need to just split by red states and blue states. We need to have basically as little to do with each other as we possibly can. She says we need to separate by red states and blue states, shrink the federal government. Everyone I talk to says this. From the sick and disgusting woke culture issue shoved down our throats to the Democrats' traitorous America's last policies, we are done. And everybody gave her a lot of crap, myself included. Most notably because I don't really understand kind of how that works. Can you imagine, by the way, being the judge in that divorce trial? That would be ugly. Talk about the worst custody hearing in history, right? Anyway, but then recently, after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, she brings us back up again. There's nothing left to talk about with the left. They hate us. They assassinated our nice guy who actually talked to them peacefully, debating ideas. Then millions on the left celebrated, made clear they want all of us dead. To be honest, I want a peaceful national divorce. And basically what Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying, and I don't agree with this, by the way, but I think that it's worth using this as an opportunity to talk about. Marjorie Taylor Greene is in essence saying Brutus was right all along. That's her argument, right? She's not putting it as eloquently as Brutus would have, but that's what she's saying. She's saying Brutus was right all along. And my way of dealing with this is to put it to my students in those kinds of terms, right? If you look at the United States today and you look at the things that we have accomplished together, which are pretty amazing, but at the same time, look at how divided and polarized the country is right now. Who's got the better argument? And even though I'm definitively on the side of Madison and Hamilton, I don't think we get very far educating students if we don't at least give them the opportunity to consider whether Madison and Hamilton are right. I want Madison and Hamilton to be right. That doesn't mean they are. So, you know, when this kind of came up, I used this as an opportunity to talk about we have a very real question in front of us. And what's really interesting is that if you look at Brutus 1 and you look at Federalist 1, they throw the same challenge at the readers. There's this fantastic thing that is a quote out of Federalist 1. It seems to have been left to the people of this continent to determine by their wisdom and their actions, you know, whether we're going to have. And I'm gonna speed up the quote a little bit here because I want to move on. Whether we're going to have a government based on accident and force or reason and choice. And Brutus essentially says the exact same thing in the first paragraph. This is the most momentous choice that any of you are ever going to have, and this is going to determine whether we're going to be a free people or not. You know, the stakes are incredibly high here. So I think one of the ways that I've done this before, as a lesson, is that I've split students kind of into groups, and I get the giant chart paper, which is super fun. The stuff that sticks to the walls, albeit badly. They need to make that stuff stick better. But I split them into groups and I have them defend one or the other, you know, that should we have, this sort of large republic? What are the advantages of large republics, according to Madison and Hamilton? And then I have them brainstorm, what are some things that you think maybe that Madison and Hamilton didn't think of that are advantages to having such a big country, right? What are some things that the federal government is able to do because we are able to sort of pool everybody's talents together and things like that? But then I have some groups that are critical, and they side with Brutus, and they have to come up with, like, what are all the pros to saying, like, let's split the whole thing up. So that's definitely a way to get kids thinking about, like, yes, we have this thing called the United States, and we're used to it. We all grew up with it, but it doesn't have to exist. We all sort of assume that it does, but it really doesn't. And the only thing keeping it going is us. So, that's definitely a thing. Let's see. Do I think the healthcare clusters, small preview of how the Republic will do? Maybe. I don't know. I think that's a really interesting idea. And I'll definitely use that when I get to teaching federalism. But I think one of the most important ways that you can get people to engage with Montesquieu and Madison, just getting to the question here that Emily wanted me to answer, is to show them how relevant it is to our modern experience. And I really do. I mean, this is such a central question to all of American history. I mean, and I heard Dr. Brooks mention it when he sort of gave mention to the Gettysburg Address. And there's Lincoln in November of 1863. And we all know the more famous lines, but there's a really powerful one in there that I think sometimes we ignore. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Can we make this work? And so far the answer has been yes. But man, is it it's when you see how quickly it can come apart, you realize how fragile it is. It's definitely tough. I think I want to talk really quickly about some strategies. One of the things that I think is important is actually having students engage with primary source text. I think is always important. One of the things that we have really started to emphasize a lot at Freeman is the importance of really doing guided reading on primary sources with students, helping them learn through, let's go through this text and let's do it together and highlight, annotate, add some notes here and there and things like that. One of the things that I do, and I got this from my graduate school program, is that now I've changed the way that I do a lot of my tests. So all of my students get a source book at the beginning of the year. And that source book, they can just tear to shreds. They can highlight in it, underline it. It's theirs to keep forever. But I also let them use it on their tests, and I ask them questions that will require them to know what's in the source book really well. And that's actually been super helpful in terms of getting them to really engage with the material, because they know I'm going to be asking questions that can be answered out of that source book. And so the more that they spend time in it and know it, the better they're going to do. And that's worked out pretty well for me. So I think anytime that you're not just telling them what an Enlightenment thinker thought, but you're actually showing them, like, here, let's go through it. Let's talk about this guy. What's he saying right here? And students at first really, really hate that because it's hard. It forces them to think in ways that they're not used to having to think. They really just want me to project. They want me to put a PowerPoint up on the board and Mr. Fabian, just tell us what he said. That's all. Just tell us what he meant. We'll move on. please don't make us read Mr. Hobbes again. Like that's, I always tell them when they read Hobbes, they need to have a little chocolate nearby. He's like the philosophical equivalent of a Dementor from Azkaban. But it's he has a sort of negative outlook. I always remind them though that Hobbes died alone and childless, so you know. But I think that really getting them to read it and also helping them to make the connections, right? And so one of the things that I like to do is I have them read the portions of the Magna Carta. I don't make them read the whole thing because that would be evil. But the English Petition of Right, the English Bill of Rights, but then I take them specifically to, all right, here are the acts of the British. Why are the colonists so upset? Point right here. Here is the English Bill of Rights. What make the connection, and that lets them see exactly what's going on. And so I bring out a modern example. Okay, is this modern example an example of a warrantless search that they would have been upset about? And how we're still having these arguments over what this means. What does it mean to have this right to free speech? What does it mean to have this right to protest? And things like that. I think that whenever you can make something that happened in the past relevant to something that happens in the present, that's really your key.
Thank you, Ben. That's super helpful. And I'm glad that you talked about like how you're making those connections as the students are reading through those texts, uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're making that connection iterative as they're
Mm-hmm.
reading more and more in the source material. That's great. Thank you. And yeah, thank you for walking us through, lots of different examples in your own classroom and kind of what sticks with the students. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all right, so as we are just about at time, I don't know, Dr. Brooks, did you want to add anything here as we conclude our time together?
I'm fortunate of this for this organization that is presenting these issues. And one of the problems I have is that, we don't teach American history. I mean, you can go through college and not take American history, and I think that should be a requirement that we know something about the history of this country.
Well, absolutely. And yes, earlier, Ben and I were saying everyone should be just required reading. Federalist 10, everyone should be just required to read Federalist 10. All right. Well, since we are at our 60 minutes of 60-minute civics, I will wrap things up for this evening. I'm sorry. I know that a couple of you did have questions that were still in the chat. I will just encourage you to please come back to future 60-minute civics. We'll be hosting these just about once a month for the rest of the academic year. So please come back for more. But I do want to thank Dr. Brooks and Ben Fabian for such a thoughtful and engaging discussion this evening, and all of you for joining us and asking really tremendous questions. So we hope you're leaving with lots of new insights for your classroom and for your community, and with fresh ideas to help students see some of the relevance of these historic ideas in civic life today. And so I will be emailing everybody a link to watch the recording if you arrived late or if you want to watch it again, or certainly share it with anybody else you think it would be useful for. You'll have that email the next day or two. And if you would like a certificate to demonstrate proof of contact hours for professional development, you can respond to my email and let me know. So on behalf of the Center for Civic Education, thanks again for being with us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next month at our future 60-minute civics. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.